So I'm going to present my research today, which is looking at a blockchain-based intellectual property system for fashion designs. So because there's quite a lot going on within this topic area, I just wanted to give a little bit of context at the beginning. So at the moment, I'm working at London College of Fashion as a lecturer in fashion law, which is a recent position that I started in the summer. But in the past few years, I've worked in a consulting capacity for lots of different emerging designers and also a few fashion technology companies, which is where a project focus on emerging designers linked with technology has come from. So to start with, intellectual property can be defined as a set of international legal rights that protect the financial and reputational interests of people who create things, people who invent things, and innovators as well. So there's lots of different types of intellectual property, of which copyright, trademarks, patents, and design rights are a few of them. This project really focuses on unregistered rights, so automatic rights, such as copyright and unregistered design rights. Other intellectual property rights, such as trademarks and patents, are those that you have to register. So you have to go through a registration process and pay a fee for those. We're looking at the other end of the intellectual property spectrum, which is copyright and design rights. Because of the complexity around evidence for these rights, that's where there is an opportunity for further strength, which is what we're looking at here with blockchain. So essentially, when it comes to copyright, if you want to enforce your copyright or rely on it in court, it's really important that you have evidence. You have to prove that you are the designer of that garment, that you were the person who took that photograph, that you were the person who painted that picture. So it's really important to have that evidence in place to rely on copyright. But as people design and develop things in very different ways, often evidence isn't the most important thing within design and development processes. So I wanted to try and find ways for people to understand more about their intellectual property, especially copyright, and think about how we can really enhance that protection. So one of my colleagues at University of the Arts London uses this very nice definition of intellectual property, which I think is much more creative centric. And it's about thinking of intellectual property as managing your relationships, your reputation, and ways to make revenue from your work. So thinking about who you work with and how you work with them, thinking about how your reputation is impacted by the way that you manage your work, and also how you make money from what you create, especially in fashion, but also in the wider creative industries. It's a really important consideration as to revenue, as lots of things happen for free or for unpaid in industry. So for further context, my project focused on emerging designers. So emerging designers actually are a really significant portion of the London fashion market at the moment. Something like 70 to 80% of designers that show on schedule at London Fashion Week are within the category of emerging, which means they're within 5 years of their graduation, and they are a micro or small to medium enterprise. So we're talking anybody with a turnover of under 2 million. So that's obviously quite a high threshold to reach. So it categorizes a lot of different designers. So these groups of emerging designers are really trying to reframe the industry. They're trying to work in different ways. They are trying out new innovative business models, and very many of them have sustainability, reduced waste, and new ways of producing at the heart of what they do. They're really trying to create an alternative vision for the future of fashion, and they are very much the driving force within fashion innovation, as well as their designs and ways of working playing a really crucial role in wider industry research and development. Now, that's an advantage and a disadvantage. They are also the group of designers who are copied most. In the industry, we see a lot about copying and fashion on social media, whether it's from various TikTok pages calling out copying, or whether it's really renowned pages like Diet Prada highlighting side-by-side copies, as well as issues around counterfeiting. So that's one of the issues that emerging designers face, thinking about their intellectual property in an industry that is probably quite literally defined by a culture of copying. So, as we talked about in the first section, copyright relies upon evidence. It's really important to have evidence to prove that you created this work. But in fashion, due to many factors, including collaboration and timescales being very short, often it isn't as successfully relied upon as possible. So some of the other issues that emerging designers face are access to showcasing. So the fashion industry still works on a very traditional calendar with showcases twice a year within very expensive schedules. I think last year it was around £3,000 just to have your name, your brand name listed on the London Fashion Week schedule, and that gave you no access to anything other than just the fact that your name appeared on a list on a website. So very expensive access to schedules, and that isn't a particularly welcoming space for our growing cohort of graduate designers. We have a lot of really successful fashion schools and fashion education system in the UK, but we then aren't providing them a very successful route to market. Associated with that difficult showcasing schedule is wholesale production, and thinking about that also having a high barrier to entry, because often factories and other production facilities have high minimum order quantities, which can make it really difficult and expensive for early stage designers to reach that threshold to find that cash, and that upfront cost. And obviously, even if they are showcasing and a buyer places an order, much of this upfront funding for production is going to have to be covered by the designer. So, as I said, copyright and design rights really rely on evidence. And if they want to rely on this copyright, whether that be in court or otherwise, they have to have sufficient evidence to show that they were the first creator, which means that they have to have a very extensive record of their design process. Now, this is where some of the difficulties come in, because designers work in very different ways. I've worked with accessories and handbag designers who do every single thing by hand, and then they pass over their designs to another member of the team to work on any digitized elements and anything further in that direction. We have lots of designers graduating from fashion school now who probably didn't pick up a pencil in their whole time at fashion school, and they are very focused and very skilled in digital design software, using and utilizing a range of various softwares. So when we're thinking about maintaining a valid record of your design process, obviously that's going to vary massively depending on whether you look at, pencil and paper designing, or whether we're looking at design software like Genera and Clo3D. So this is a reason why it's important, and I just selected one case that I looked at, but my report covers another 4. This was a High Court case in the UK looking specifically at design rights, which pretty similar to copyright, work in a pretty similar way. And essentially, this court case was decided on lack of evidence. So it was to do with essentially the curve in the shape of jeans. It was to do with the shape of a product, of a garment. And essentially, because this one company was unable to provide evidence of their design and development process, they were said to have infringed G-Star's UK design right, because they couldn't prove otherwise. They had no evidence to show that they designed it from scratch, that they had a mood board, which then turned into first iterations of a design, and how that led through to their final design. Because they couldn't prove any of that, they lost the case. So they would have been hit with a hefty fine for that. And that's just one example within fashion of how unregistered designs work in practice. So what I wanted to look at with this project was how we can really enhance that way of working, how we can create a system that works for designers to have this copyright evidence without hopefully creating them hours and hours of more work. So I was thinking, and there's been a few papers that have talked about the potential of blockchain for copyright evidence. Now, there's only been 2 papers that have actually looked at this directly. One in the US, where the copyright system works significantly differently. So there was a definite gap in looking at it from a UK perspective and also from an emerging designer perspective. If blockchain is something that's new to you, it's essentially a technology which records lots and lots of transactions. All these transactions then link together, and this forms a record of something. So it can be used from a financial perspective. It can be used in supply chains to record different elements of what goes on from the start through to delivery to the consumer. And at the moment, it's really being put to work in supply chains within fashion to support enhancement and also evidence of transparency. So there is a definite opportunity that we've seen from a few papers to look at the problem-solving potential of blockchain for this copyright evidence. And it was really important for me to hear the designer's voice in this project. I wanted to know what fashion designers actually thought, because many of the papers before are written from a legal perspective, so that often means that they don't have any primary research. So it was very important for me to listen to fashion designers and see what they thought. So I set out to have sort of 3 key strands to my research. First of all, looking at what designers were doing at the moment, then looking at how blockchain could actually provide benefit to emerging designers, and then looking at the limitations and barriers. What I hadn't quite planned for when I started this project was a lack of understanding around copyright within everybody that I spoke to. So I sort of had to backtrack and think about how I structured my primary research once I figured out that we needed to work out a way of being on the same page when it came to understanding copyright in practice and really making sure that I heard the voice of the emerging designer. So when I discussed with the focus groups to think about how they might benefit from blockchain integration, and the focus groups were with groups of emerging designers that were involved in some kind of funding or startup scheme within East London. So in East London, we have the growing fashion district, and I worked with lots of different groups of designers within East London who were in year 1 to 3 of starting their brand. So nobody who was in sort of that first year, they had to have got through the first 12 months, and then we worked with them from there. So essentially, some of the benefits that they outlined were evidence for copyright. So they thought that this was a really useful potential application of copyright to have their records in place. And a lot of them suggested that if they'd spoken to a lawyer before, the lawyer had essentially told them to put their designs in an envelope and post that to themselves with a stamp and a letterbox approach. And they couldn't quite believe that this was what the suggestion was from lawyers in 2023. So I think they were pleased to be discussing something a little bit more high-tech than other discussions. I quite liked some of the discussions around connecting different elements of their supply chain. So they really felt that blockchain could be something that brings everything together to connect different parts of the product. And one participant talked about thinking of this protection, this linking starting up design phase rather than starting at product first, which is where it starts at the moment. But as I said, we had this real lack of understanding around the technicalities of proof with unregistered IP rights. And irrespective of people's backgrounds, I think this was a big topic of discussion because of the real diverse range of experiences and locations of which the designers were based. So obviously copyright and intellectual property rights work quite differently depending on where you're based. So it was a big topic of conversation as to actually how it works in the UK at the moment. But most people did agree that they could see the approach from a real practical perspective. So that was quite a nice conclusion. Then we also looked at the limitation side of things. One of the things the designers highlighted was that they didn't want it to interrupt their way of working at the moment. They didn't want to have to go and do this whole other thing in order to register their designs. They wanted to keep it really simple because they're already busy enough. You know, a lot of these brands are run by one person and some freelancers helping out as and when they've got the cash to do so. So they wanted this to be really, really practical. So there's definitely more pilot testing needed there to look at how we integrate these softwares. And I have every intention of building on this. They also wanted it to work for different tools and techniques. It goes back to my pencil and paper example, and also thinking about Clo3D, because a lot of them utilize different techniques for different products. So I think that's an important consideration. And then we also had this conversation about whether it's actually 100% the answer. And obviously, when it comes to copyright, there is never that assurance. You know, it's often an intellectual property right, which is approached in a very informal matter. And there's a lot of grey areas involved. So the designers were somewhat disappointed that this was not something that would 100% verify their designs. So leading on from this, I'm now involved in two projects linked to this piece of research. The first being looking at digital product passports. Digital product passports are part of the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is coming into place next year, which is requiring the disclosure of data and records of impact of their activities, mostly linked obviously to sustainability, but I think there's a big opportunity to look at intellectual property here as well. So I'm working with E.ON to essentially look at how we can record iterations of the design process and almost add copyright evidence to this nice list of benefits that they have from their current digital product passport. So we're looking at what this looks like in practice and running a pilot program that is research-led to really develop this in the future. And the second project that I'm involved with is with XYZ Exchange. Obviously, within this area, people love the brand name XYZ. So hence why I'm working with two companies with essentially the same name. But we're looking at fashion systems and how we can change and we can shift away from traditional fashion systems and the way that designers look at design and manufacture together, and how decentralized methods of ownership and authorship can really unlock this. So essentially looking at blockchain and starting at the design stage, as you can see here with that little diagram, starting with the idea here and thinking about how that leads to factories, how that leads to unlocking finance, materials, looking at video games, all the way through to producing and manufacturing garments in different ways. So we're essentially looking at developing an ID system for tangible and tradable digital assets. So that is how we're looking at the impact of the project at the moment, and hopefully there is lots more to come from this, both in terms of research and also industry impact straight away. But I'd like to leave you with this question: is anything really original? So yes, we're looking at how we protect designers' intellectual property rights, but is anything really new? So I'll leave you with that.